Hey, Journeyers. Today I'm really excited to be having Jennifer on the call today. Jennifer and I are going to be chatting a little bit about what it's like to be Catholic, Asian, and queer. So thanks again, Jennifer, for being here. If you want to kind of introduce yourself, share a little bit about your background, that'd be super awesome.
Mhm. Hi, Irene and everybody. My name is Jennifer, she, her pronouns, and a little bit about myself. Kind of identify as like a Vietnamese Catholic gay woman. And I think most of the intersection of where spirituality and sexuality cross is through my volunteering as a youth leader for the Vietnamese Eucharistic Youth Movement. So I'll be talking a lot about that in that experience and holding that space. But yeah.
Awesome. Do you think you could share a little bit more about your background, like where you grew up, maybe anything kind of that pertains to either being like Asian American in a place without a lot of Asians or being queer in a place without a lot of out queer people?
Yeah, gosh, it's it's a journey, but definitely it's a growing one. And I currently live in Minnesota, so the it's predominantly white, but I was fortunate enough to kind of grew up in the Vietnamese church community, and there was always like Sunday school where we would go to church with other Vietnamese students and kind of learn about Vietnamese and learn about our faith. And from there, I've been a youth leader there for 10 years. So in that sense, it's really nice to be able to kind of like maintain that Vietnamese part of my identity. And but with that, it was just a lot of complete like internalized homophobia that developed with how I view myself and my sexuality, and just kind of confiding it, not being able to find a place to confide it in outside of, just kind of journaling as a way of escaping. And eventually I was able to come out to my fellow youth leaders within the community, and it was really received well and supportively, which was surprising. So I kind of want to use that to continue to kind of broaden the sense of acceptance and love for any kids of mine that identify within that community of the LGBTQ plus. So, but it's an experience. I mean, kind of, I don't know. It's still navigating it, but yeah, I think it's a lot of learning that I'm still doing, and a lot of like personal self-acceptance that I'm continuing to work on too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even growing up here in the Bay Area, for me personally, like coming into my own queer identity, like I grew up in a place where, like, people always talk about the Bay Area being like the most accepting place to go. And it is a very accepting place at the same
Right?
time. But
Mm-hmm.
like just depending on the circles that you're in, like where you grew
Mm-hmm.
up, like with immigrant parents, like they just didn't have a lot of terminology for things like this, and like they
Yeah.
didn't know anyone who was queer. Like kind of became like a whole thing where my parents are like, oh no, like this American culture has like convinced like one of our children
Yes.
that they're gay, and they're just like, I can't believe it. And they're
Yeah.
just like, this doesn't happen in China. And like obviously there are a lot of LGBT people in China, but
Mm-hmm.
I mean a lot of them are also not out. They don't want to make their families feel bad by like coming out and like making it seem like, oh, you kind of failed as a parent because now your kid's gay. And like
Yeah,
that's not
exactly
conducive
that.
to society.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So like, yeah, I can only imagine like maybe growing up in a place where there's like even less exposure to it, that it'd be like even harder. And I think
Yeah.
one of the things that was really helpful was just having like supportive friends, like kind of how you mentioned coming out to other people who you weren't sure whether they're going to be supportive or not.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was really fortunate that I grew up with like a really tight knit group of friends,
Yeah.
and we were almost all Asian American, like with
Yeah.
similar upbringings of like immigrant parents coming over to the U.S. and like struggling and stuff like that. So I was really lucky that my friends were all very supportive, and I think that helped a
Mm-hmm.
lot, even like when your family might or might not be supportive.
Right.
So, I guess kind of exploring a little bit more about your queer identity. How did you
Yeah.
kind of first know that you were queer, and like how how was that process like for you?
Yeah, I don't know why, but I've always probably had a crush on every single, it's like since kindergarten. Like I've always had, oh, that's the girl. I want to be her best friend. Or I knew it was a crush too that I felt towards the woman, like towards a classmate versus like it was a guy. And I I was struggling with like a lot of social anxiety too. So it kind of took the back burner. Um, it wasn't until I started college where just that part of identity was just more talked about, or there was space for me to kind of impose, not impose, but space for me to kind of express that. And in, yeah, so I came out when publicly through a YouTube video actually, um, when I was 21. That was about probably 7 years ago. And yeah, so, and I don't know, it was not received well by my family. My mom was begging me like, please take this down, please take this down. She already knew that I was gay for 2 years, but she thought that, oh, that I was trying to change or do like some sort of prayer or conversion therapy to make it go away. So when she saw that I was posting this and people were reaching out to her, she was like begging me all day to take it down. But it was heartbreaking, and it was the most gratifying thing I've ever done for myself.
Wow, can I watch this YouTube video later? Is it still
Yeah,
up?
yeah, I'll definitely send you the link after this.
Whoa, that's really, really brave.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so hard to do. I did make like my own like post. I don't even know where I posted it. Maybe on Facebook or
Yeah.
something, but I did make some kind of like public-ish statement either
Mhm.
amongst my friends or I don't even know. Yeah, but definitely I think my like coming out post was like writing it to my friends, like also in college
Intimate.
because I
Yeah.
was like, oh, like now I'm in college and I'm like exploring, meeting so many different people from so many
Mhm.
different backgrounds and like writing like a big long post to like all my friends saying like FYI, like I'm queer now.
Yay.
But it wasn't
Yes.
through a YouTube video. I didn't even start really using YouTube more heavily until the past few years,
Yeah.
um, which is kind of amazing that you were able to figure it all out and like post up a video like so many years ago.
It was, yeah. It was, yeah. No, it was, yeah. It, and I didn't even know how that came to be, deciding to use YouTube versus just like a social media post. But yeah.
Wow. What, well, after
Mhm.
you made that post and your family you said wasn't too accepting, did your
Yeah.
friends respond positively to it? Did you like take that YouTube video, maybe like share it on like your Facebook or some other like social media platform, or how did people end up finding your video?
Yeah, yeah. So I shared it on Facebook through the link, and then I had a lot of kiddos like reaching out to me, my youth kids reaching out to me in that space, to talk more about that Catholic and sexual, like, in their sexuality. But yeah, it was a lot of DMs afterwards. I kind of was celebrating in this and like public support, which made me feel, oh, God, like it was a black hole that I was in, and to finally like know that this part of my identity is accepted is just, and received well. It was gratifying. And just as you were saying, like your sweet notes to friends and like sharing this part of you and having it received well, that's like personal letters, I think, is much more braver than just like a mass like, boop, all right, there, take it as it is.
Yeah. And for those who don't know, DMs stand for like direct messages, like when you see someone post something publicly and you respond to them privately. Like that's really awesome that you got a lot of people messaging you. Is that something that's difficult to navigate in like your youth groups or anything like that, where people maybe aren't sure like who's maybe a supportive like elder? I mean, I cringe to think of myself as being like an elder, but at some point we're gonna have to accept these types of terms and like
Yes.
just thinking about it, like yeah, I think being out, like a lot of people will message you directly and
Mm.
like tell you about their own like potential like queer experiences and stuff like that. And I think that's something that I value, that
Mhm.
people feel like they can reach out to you about that because you're so honest and vulnerable and public about it. So like, how was that for you? Like receiving those messages or like, did you learn a lot from it?
Yeah. it was definitely humbling to just be that, at least that one support person. I think I read in a study where queer kids or queer teens or who are within the GLBT community just need one supportive adult to have their mental health not traject in a more healthier way. But if they have none, then it's like higher case of depression or anxiety. So, and I think that's because of, I think honestly, because of these personal messages from people's lived experiences, why I kind of pursued therapy and going into that field, because that's exactly the community I want to help, like person of color and queer identity.
Awesome. And do people ever know that you're queer, like as a therapist? Like when people come to you, is that something that they know, or is it something they just kind of discover? I know it's not really something you'd probably be like, bringing up in every therapy session because it's about them, not about like your own personal life. But like, do
Exactly.
people know that you're like LGBT supportive? I know you can like search for therapists and kind of like tag yourself as like an LGBT supportive therapist.
Right. Yeah. Um, in my description and how I describe the people I want to help, people sort of know. Most times they don't know, but then they ask. And then when they ask, I don't mind sharing that part of my identity just briefly in terms of like, oh, yeah, I see that. And I come from a similar background, but yours is yours, mine is mine too. So,
Mhm. Oh, yeah, that's awesome. And so part of what inspired you to become a therapist was like your own struggles and your own like coming out.
yes, yes.
That's yeah, that's tough.
Yeah.
Yeah, has it been difficult to navigate like as a youth leader, like in your space?
Oh, absolutely. I question being a youth leader every day, just showing up because um, it's not talked about enough. And when I came out and parents saw the videos, and they told my priest like, hey, I don't think she's fit to teach my kids, and like questioning my ability to like connect with kids. But for me, I was able to connect with kids really well, even if it's not talking about my sexuality at all, just like the relationship with God. So it was disheartening to hear, but it's almost expected because but my priest was able to kind of hold that space for me and be like, nope, she can still teach and like be an effective teacher in that sense. But I gotta like pre-prep like there's tells of like when I start to get emotionally like triggered, because there's certain homilies or stories within the Bible that's talked about by the priest that is a precursor about my GLBT identity or my queer identity. And it's just like a sensitive, like super sensitive place I'm noticing. And like I want to drop out, but I know that like how many kids feel this way, like feel so alone. And I know that no one should take this advice and like expend themselves for other people in this way. But I think my goal before I leave would at least to just have an open and honest conversation about not alienating communities who want to have, or individuals who want to have that relationship with God.
Mhm.
But I still have to work through my stuff before I can have a conversation with religious leaders about this.
Mhm. And have anyone else at your church come out ever since you came out, like pretty publicly?
Yes, there has been some kids, yes. Yeah, and a few other of my friends, well, one other friend that came out too through the church. So,
Oh, wow. Did they talk to you about before coming out, or how did that happen?
um, most of them, they talk about it. I don't remember. I think there was like 2 or 3 students, but it was more so like confiding in me about their experience in general,
Mm,
but not about coming out.
mm, mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for people who are queer and maybe religious and not sure where they can go or what they can do about it? Is it like looking online for resources, looking for community? Like, kind of, do you have any like tips or recommendations for people?
Yeah. I think with that identities, yeah. So I know that in unsupportive families or contexts, you want to find connection and support elsewhere so that you can continue to have this like shield when you're working in a more toxic environment from family members. There's so much queer, like the Trevor Project.
Oh yeah, Trevor Project.
Trevor
Trevor Noah
Project.
is that
Trevor
really
Oh,
hilarious
that darn
comedian.
hilarious comedian.
Yeah.
Yeah, Trevor Noah. Well,
Trevor Noah making his name too popular. Now we
yeah,
can't remember
it's
other
like, yeah.
words.
Yeah,
Oh my
Trevor
gosh.
Project.
Mhm.
There's a lot of Facebook group within SAS, actually. If is this a good plug for SAS?
Yeah, let's shout out SAS, the
Yeah,
Sapphic Asian subtle Asian Sapphic Squad. Oh
closer than
man,
what I would have probably guessed.
I can't believe
I should look it up.
it. Anyways, for people who
Yeah,
don't know, we met through the SAS group, Subtle Asian Sapphic Squad.
squad. Yes.
Yeah. So if you look it up, SASS, it's kind of like a funny little play on name word, and it's a little Facebook group with about 2,000 people on there, specifically for Asian sapphics. So women who like women, but is open to allies as well as this group. And it's a really cool group. Like people post all kinds of stuff there. People like post like coming out resources. They post like their own coming out stories, their own dating stories, like selfies where they feel like they can be themselves or, present in the way that they would like to present. So it's a cool space. So plug
Absolutely.
for SAS on
Yes.
Facebook. Great, great
Mhm.
group. Lots of cool people on there and good discussion.
Yeah, and internationally. So not just the US, but across the borders. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess for people who don't have a supportive family, kind of look outside, look into like nonprofits, like community groups online. And
Mhm.
then what would you kind of say for people who like are unsure whether their family is like supportive or not?
Unsure. Gosh. I think little subtle snippets of like, hey, what's your I think all of us are just like safety assessing with little like drops of like information and seeing, oh, what's your thoughts or opinions? But yeah, that's so personal, and like just know that like whatever your journey is, we're also ready to receive you and celebrate you. But in that unsureness, yeah, I can't what's your thought, Irene?
Yeah, this is a tough one. I think I would say like maybe asking your parents if you could see a therapist,
Mm,
depending on how old you are. I'd say, like, oh, yeah, I have been feeling unsure about this and that. Like, I kind of want to find a therapist. And then maybe you could look up the therapist and look for one that's LGBT supportive. And then maybe like working with that therapist, kind of like helping you slowly come out to them. Cause like,
mhm.
I think parents can kind of tell sometimes if you're struggling a lot and they might not know why you're struggling and like they could be supportive and want to help you, but they just don't know like what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
But sometimes they could be unsupportive. And I think I agree with you, like leaving little breadcrumbs so that eventually they could like find out whether it's like, well, I guess I'm like dating myself now, but when I was coming out, like gay marriage was not legal.
Mhm.
So I feel like that was kind of a thing. And before you'd be like, oh, I hope that they pass gay marriage for same-sex couples and just
Yeah,
see
right.
how they respond. And like this is a
Yeah.
very Asian experience. Like a lot of people will say like, oh, Asian parents can actually see that same-sex couples deserve to be married. They just don't want to see it for their own family. And like
Yeah.
that
Oh my
is like
gosh.
a very common thing. And I think it's okay for me to say as an Asian person with this lived experience, but like people being supportive for other people, but just feeling like, oh, but that's not my family. Like I
Mm,
think it's okay for people to be gay, but that's just not my family because we don't do that stuff. We're like a very
exactly.
like community abiding people.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
those people are just like selfish and in their own little world. And like
Mm,
uh, yeah, I think that's like a really common experience of what I've heard of like other Asian Americans. Of course, there are some who are really unsupportive, some are who are really supportive, but like that's a pretty common experience that I've heard.
yeah.
Um, Yeah, I think leaving subtle cues and seeing like if people are supportive or not. And then maybe even starting with like a sibling who seems like they might be supportive so that when the
Mhm.
time comes and you have to talk to your parents might go to your other sibling and be like, oh my gosh, did you know that so and so is gay? And they'll be like, yeah, who cares?
You
And
just
like, like,
you just showed my whole game plan of how it actually went down. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
like I think
Yeah.
having like an ally, whether it's like your cousin or
Mhm.
like another aunt or uncle or something, like
Yeah.
even like for me, like I know my aunt was like pretty supportive because like I
Mhm.
think maybe my cousin told her or something, I don't know.
Yeah.
But like I felt like my aunt was a lot more supportive. Also
Mhm.
because they don't really like to them, it's not like they feel like they failed as a parent or something. Like they're just like, oh, I just want my nieces and nephews to be happy. And
Mhm.
like that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
And people, like most people know that, like, if you're an LGBT person and you can't come out and you have to like hide and pretend to be someone else, it's like a really stressful thing. Like,
Mm.
it's an activity that requires a lot of attention and a lot
Yeah.
of like tiptoeing around stuff. It's just like really tough. And I
Yeah.
mean, obviously, it's not a great place to be and can lead to like, higher rates of depression and suicide and whatnot.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think finding a good ally, I think, is one of the best things I would probably recommend.
Mhm. Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly that. Yeah. So I'm sure, I hope there's just at least one person within the family members, either be cousin that you know is supportive verbally before, and then just resting on that support and then continuing to grow in that number, because then they become your spokesperson too, as you said, Irene. Yeah.
Yeah, like if you don't feel comfortable, maybe they can come out for you. Like if you give them your permission, and that's like a thing. Like don't
Yeah.
like out people unless they're not ready.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, don't out people unless they're ready and they kind of want you to, and they just can't do it because it's a really hard conversation to have.
Yeah.
And they're like, don't want to deal with all the anxiety of it. And maybe you can do it if you're comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Are there any other like resources or things you might recommend for people, whether it's like websites or nonprofits, or what do you think about maybe even finding a therapist, like finding an LGBT therapist? Like, do you have any tips for people?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so twofolds in that, or two parts on that. So understand what your insurance is, and please call them first, and understanding if there's a deductible you have to pay or if there's any co-pays, because for us, when we're running and working with insurance, it takes us a couple of weeks, and by then you've probably had 2 or 3 sessions, and then oftentimes there's a big bill that you weren't expecting. So making sure they're within network, um, the place or the therapist is within network, and then do consultations. Kind of, it's like consultations are like first dates, because I think the therapeutic relationship is probably the most important sources for change. So your connection with them is important, and most times therapists offer free consultations to see how they can be helpful and if it's a good fit for you too. um, so doing as much as that as possible. But right now I know that all therapists schedules are built up or really completely busy after COVID and 2020 in general. So um, Psychology Today is a good source for kind of what you want to work on in GLBT as a selection, or religion as a selection too. Um, yeah. And I think the second part was, um, when oftentimes when we come out, it's hard on parents, especially if you're coming up. I can only speak from the Catholic perspective in my own personal experience, and just Christianity in general. Most parents, when they find out that their kid is queer or GLBT, there's also a period of grief and loss, and like a dissonance. Like they hear, okay, especially in an Asian community, you hear, oh, it's immoral, it's a sin, like, oh, it's not natural, all of these things. And then to hear that your child comes out, and then there's this huge difference in what you've heard from the community about who your child is and who you know your child is. There's like it's so hard for it to overlap for them. So that's why for them, just giving them the time to grieve, just the losses in a way of their dream of their ideal child, like not getting married, not having kids, that to parents, it's and giving them the space to kind of grieve that and then continue to kind of nurture that relationship with them. So I come from the perspective of kind of like, okay, like trying to find like, because exactly that, I was so upset with how my parents or my family members reacted to my sexuality, and just trying to kind of put myself in their shoes, and like, if they accept this part of you, what part of them are they losing? What part of their ideas are they losing in the narrative there? But yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. Like, from my own perspective, I feel like I would like my parents to be supportive. I would have liked them to be supportive, but yeah, I also understand that, they had a lot of expectations, and, you know, whether you should have really high expectations for your child or not, I guess is a different conversation.
Yes.
It's like, do you really
Sure.
want to put all these like stressors on your child to be this successful or go to this school or go to this whatever? But I know they have those expectations because they want what's best for you. And like, I understand that. And I'm not mad over it or anything. I know they want what's best for you because they had such a difficult life, and they just hope that you'll have a better life. So I understand, like, they don't want you to come out because, coming out means, you might be discriminated against at work. You might not find a significant other. Like, you're going to have a whole bunch of other things. And back in the day, we couldn't even get married and like have the same legal rights. And even nowadays, there's still like a whole bunch of issues where like some states don't want to like allow same-sex parents to be able to adopt the other person's parent, and there's just like a whole bunch of issues, and not even like even like trans discrimination right now is still like a big thing that's not fully sussed out and figured out how we can not discriminate against trans people. So they're like, they just don't want your life to be super difficult. And I understand that. And like, they're just trying to like, at least for me, it was like, oh, you don't want your life to be this difficult and have all these other additional things that are going to be so hard for your life. So you should pick the easier route. So, so I'm like, I get it, because logically it makes sense. Like, do I want to be discriminated against and maybe have like a dating pool that will be much smaller or whatever? I don't know. I mean, yeah, who would choose to like be discriminated against if there was a choice and it was something you could just like snap your fingers and be like, all right, yeah, let me take this path that's like way easier that all my other friends are on. No, now I'm going to climb through this path with like a whole bunch of bushes in the way. Like, none of my friends are there, but after you've made that decision, you will find other people on that path too. And like, they'll be there to support you and like cheer you on. And like, you can always still be friends with your friend on the other path. You just it won't be as easy for you, but they'll still be around. And if they're good friends, they'll still be around whether you come out or not. So I understand where they're coming from. They just come from a really practical mindset of like, at least my parents, they're just very practical. They're like, why would you choose to do this when it's going to be worse for your life? And they're like, we had to deal with like so many difficulties of like racism and whatever. And like, why would you choose this additional thing for people to discriminate against you? Yeah. So, I mean, I understand where they're coming from.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Parents in their loving ways and just simplifying such hard things such as these. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, not all parents are supportive in coming from that mindset, but just like my personal experience. Yeah. So it's difficult if your parents are just unsupportive and they've always been unsupportive of anything and everything you've done, then that might be better for you to like give some space with them and not need their acceptance or appreciation. Yeah. Any other kind of parting words of wisdom you might want to share about maybe kind of your experience or anything relating to like being Asian or LGBT or Catholic?
Yeah. I'm trying to think. Being a part of being just Vietnamese Catholic and being in the queer community, it comes with its joy and it comes with its pain. But if anything, the reason I continue is because there's so much joy in the simplicity of like just discovering who you are in these spaces and being able to kind of hold both. But like a loose hold. Don't, like, I know some people were like, oh yeah, I'm Catholic and I identify as queer, and then just having to the ultimatum, giving yourself the ultimatums of having to choose one or the other, but hold a loose grip on both identities and trying to give room and space for yourself to kind of grow and understanding yourself and how you can hold both spaces in the most healthiest ways. And sometimes leaving is part of what is healthiest for you. But I shouldn't end on that note as a youth leader, but that is a reality too. Yeah. But
yeah, I think that makes sense. Like, it's not always like you need to pick one or the other. Sometimes some people can balance that and like balance and be in between, kind of that in that Venn diagram. You're like that person who's like in the middle
yeah.
on both sides. And like you're kind of doing that. And like you're doing that for like other youth, like who maybe don't have someone who could help mirror that relationship. And I think that's like really awesome. And that's like super cool. Like hopefully everything works out as well as it can. Because I think it is an important thing that people can do. Like maybe people who felt rejected from one identity or the other
Yeah.
can know that it's possible to have it to be able to identify as both willingly and proudly. So that's awesome.
Yeah, and thank you, Irene, again for just like giving this platform for the specific identity of being Asian in the queer community. Like greatly introduce your bravery in giving this space and giving me the opportunity to talk. And so far, like everyone who's showed up on your podcast too, because I got to learn so much. And also like your sea urchin adventure. Oh my gosh, you're like the master of all trades.
That video was so random. And for people who don't know, I did a random YouTube video of when I went sea urchin harvesting, and that video had like over 130,000 people view. I was like, how did this video become so popular? It was so random. It was just like I just went to Half Moon Bay because my friend is like really into fishing. So I just went over to go like hang out with them and like, oh wow, this is like so beautiful. I was like so mesmerized. Like I had to take a video of it. And this is like an old video, but during COVID, I was like looking through a bunch of my old footage of like my old days because I would take vlogs of like fun things I did during like the week or something. And then I was like, oh my gosh, this was such a fun day. I'm going to upload this video. And then somehow that one just like blew up and like was like totally unrelated to most of my regular work, which is like about like empowerment, like women's life, like sustainability or like whatever other interests that I have. But that was just the most random one. And then people got in a little argument. Actually, I don't know if you saw in the comments, like some people got in an argument about K-pop in the comments. And
I have to look now.
I was like, oh, actually, like I support people liking whatever music that they like. And I don't think, like whatever music you like, don't judge people based off of their music interests. And then I kind of just like commented that as like my close of this thread, which basically a bunch of people were arguing about K-pop and whether like K-pop people are like brainless or dumb, which I don't agree with. I just somehow it became a thread and there was like 40 comments about that. I don't know. It was
off of sea urchins.
Off of sea urchins. But anyways, yeah. Thanks again for coming on the channel today. Hopefully, people can check out different resources, whether it's like the Trevor Project, your own local youth groups. Like there could be really supportive people in your like youth groups who might be a youth leader who are supportive, like finding those allies at home or at school or at work, maybe even if you're like working, you're a little bit older. That's pretty much it. And check out SAS Group. SASS on Facebook. Yeah, check it out. All right. Well, signing off as always. Let's take a deep breath in together. Deep breath out. Have a good rest of your day, everyone. Take care.